told you to sit here without asking?" my daughter-in-law yelled, breaking my plate apart. The porcelain plate cracked in two under the weight of her hand, scattering rice across the table like small white moths escaping. May blinked at the sound, her fingers frozen around the rim of her water glass. It was not the first plate to meet that fate in this house, but the violence and the gesture still made her chest flutter with the old reflex of apology. Her daughter-in-law Hannah stood over her, cheeks flushed, eyes sharp as chipped glass. The midday light from the kitchen window hit Hannah's earrings and threw cold reflections over the room, stinging May's vision. Behind them, the kettle hissed unattended, the sound thin and frantic. May wanted to reach for it, to fix something, anything. But her hands had become strangers who no longer trusted their own decisions. She had been sitting there for less than a minute, she thought. Perhaps that had been her Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The house was not hers, though her name was still on its oldest bills. After her husband died, she had moved into the smaller back room, leaving the master bedroom to her son and his wife. Every morning she woke before the others, boiled rice porridge, and left quietly. The table this broad, heavy oak that had seen 3 generations of birthdays had become a battlefield of unspoken rules. Hannah said it was easier if May waited until the family finished breakfast before she ate. May had nodded, unsure whether this was courtesy or exile. Today she had misjudged the silence of the living room as permission. Her legs had ached. She had simply wanted to sit. The chair had creaked. The plate had followed. And now here they were, 2 women breathing hard over the debris of one mistake. Hannah's voice, when it came again, trembled with the brittle confidence of someone asserting power to cover hurt. "You could have waited. You know we will eat together later." May watched her lips move, the red of lipstick smudged by steam. She wanted to answer, to explain that the clock had confused her, that she had thought everyone had gone, but she felt the words bunch like thread in her throat, tangled and useless. She only managed a small nod, her gray hair brushing her cheek. From the hallway, her son's voice called soft, uncertain, the sound of a man balanced between 2 loyalties. May looked toward the doorway but did not call back. She had learned that silence was sometimes mercy. The rice on the table steamed faintly, clinging to the wood in tiny constellations. Hannah fetched a cloth, still breathing fast, and wiped it in sharp strokes that made the wood groan. The younger woman's hands shook, though she pretended they didn't. May watched, noticing the faint burn mark on Hannah's wrist from last week's cooking accident, the way the skin still pinked around it. She thought of saying something kind as it still hurt, but kindness, she knew, could be taken as mockery in moments like this. So she folded her hands in her lap, thumbs pressed tight, eyes on the broken plate halves. They glimmered faintly, one edge clean, one jagged, like 2 halves of a promise that would never fit again. When Hannah finally left the kitchen, muttering about waste and chores, May stayed seated. The sound of footsteps faded into the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the doorway. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe in the quiet. It had a weight, a smell, even detergent, damp cloth, faint smoke from overboiled tea. She brushed the rice gently into her palm and carried it to the sink, where she let the grains fall one by one into the drain. Each tiny thud was oddly satisfying, like punctuation on a thought she could not say aloud. She rinsed the plate shards clean and placed them carefully in the trash, as though giving them a proper burial. Then she straightened the chair she had used, aligning it perfectly with the table's edge. It felt like an apology written in geometry. Her son, June, appeared then, tie half knotted, shoulders tense. "Mom," he said quietly. She turned, and for a second, he looked just like his father, the same uncertain kindness in his eyes. "I heard shouting," he said. May smiled, a small, tired thing. "Your wife dropped the plate," she lied, voice gentle. He studied her face, perhaps noticing the dampness near her lashes, perhaps choosing not to. He exhaled, nodded, and offered her a brief, awkward touch on the arm before leaving for work. When the door closed, the house returned to its usual stillness, the kind that hummed with everything unsaid. May stood there, feeling the echo of the broken plate somewhere behind her ribs. The day had only begun, and already it felt too long. She moved to the garden behind the house, where chrysanthemums drooped under last night's rain. The air carried the smell of earth and detergent from the laundry line. May crouched, slow but steady, touching the wet petals with her fingertips. They bent without breaking. She whispered something to them, words without grammar, a comfort habit from years before. The garden was her only domain now, a strip of soil she had claimed quietly after Hannah declared the kitchen hers. Here, she could breathe. The old radio on the windowsill still worked, crackling through news in a monotone voice, sometimes catching songs from her youth. Today, it murmured about weather and traffic, words that felt like distant languages. May listened anyway. The noise reminded her she was still part of a world that existed beyond these walls. She remembered faintly, when this same table had been the heart of laughter. Hannah had been different then, shy, eager to help, her smile uncertain but warm. May had liked her, even admired the way she folded dumpling wrappers faster than anyone else. But life after the wedding had a way of narrowing kindness into duty. There had been small slights first, invisible to others. A chair moved, a dish remade. The word old-fashioned whispered during shopping trips. May told herself it was just adjustment, the natural rhythm of generations learning to share space. But time eroded patience like rain on paint. Now, years later, she felt like a guest overstaying her welcome in her own lineage. As the afternoon light softened, she washed her hands in the outdoor sink. The water ran cold and clear over the grooves of her skin. She thought of her late husband, his habit of smoothing tension with humor. He would have said something to make Hannah laugh, to make everyone sit again. May missed that someone who could take the sting out of human pride. She had never been good at words. Her silence was misread as judgment, her attempts at help mistaken for intrusion. The world of the young moved quickly, ruled by efficiency and appearance, while hers was shaped by small rituals, folding napkins neatly, warming plates before serving, counting blessings before sleep. She wondered if there was still a place for such habits in modern love. By evening, the house smelled of soy broth and pepper. Hannah cooked loudly, utensils clanging like cymbals. May stayed in her room, tracing the lines on her palm with a sewing needle, an old superstition for clarity. She thought of leaving, perhaps renting a room somewhere near the temple, somewhere with simpler air. But the thought wilted almost instantly. Where would she go with her pension? Her medicines, her memories packed in fragile boxes. She heard June return, and heard the muted conversation between husband and wife. There was laughter too, brief but genuine. May smiled at that, though it hurt. Maybe peace was not about fairness but acceptance, she thought. Still, when she closed her eyes, she saw the shards of the broken plate glinting on the floor, like a constellation that spelled her name in silence. May woke before dawn the next morning, the house still soaked in shadow. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she moved through the hallway, careful not to wake anyone. She could still feel the echo of yesterday's scene in her chest, as if her heartbeat carried shards of porcelain. She opened the kitchen window to let in the faint gray air. Outside, the first birds were restless, flicking between branches. The sound of their wings soothed her in a way no voice could. She set water to boil, counting the slow rhythm of the bubbles. The silence of the house was a delicate thing. One cough, one misstep could break it. She held her breath as she reached for the cupboard, her fingers tracing the space where her plate had been. The gap felt enormous, like a missing tooth in the smile of her small world. She poured herself tea and sat near the window instead of the table. The chair creaked differently there, as though the air itself knew she was not meant to be seen. Steam curled upward, vanishing into the dawn. May thought of her mother, who used to say that kindness unreturned becomes a stone in the soul. She wondered how many stones she carried now. Her hands trembled as she lifted the cup. The taste was faintly bitter, but it grounded her. On the wall hung a family photo from 10 years ago, everyone smiling, faces close, her husband in the center, proud. Hannah's smile in that picture was bright, almost shy, and May's own eyes looked alive, full of purpose. She turned her face away from it now. Photographs were cruel that way. They held on to joy even when it no longer fit the living. The morning light spread slowly, washing the floor with gold. May began her routine, sweeping the corridor, dusting frames, folding laundry left half dry on the rack. She moved with quiet precision, as though the world would stay kind if she only did things perfectly. From the bedrooms came muffled noises. Hannah's alarm, June's footsteps, the tap running too long. Life is resuming its rhythm. When Hannah entered the kitchen, dressed neatly, she avoided looking at May. June appeared with his usual distracted kindness, kissing Hannah's cheek before glancing at May. "Mom, did you sleep well?" he asked. She smiled, careful not to let it linger. "I did," she lied. His eyes softened, but he said nothing more. The meal passed quietly. Hannah served, June ate, and May waited until the dishes were nearly cleared before taking a seat. She ate fast, small bites, afraid of being seen taking too much time. The food was good, full of flavor, but it felt foreign on her tongue. When Hannah left for work, she didn't say goodbye. June paused at the door, gave May a half wave, and followed. The door clicked shut, and the house emptied again. May sat at the table, her reflection faint in the polished surface. and wondered how a place filled with family could feel lonelier than any widow's cottage. Around noon, a neighbor knocked Mrs. Kim from next door, carrying pickled radish in a small jar. "You look tired," the woman said kindly. May accepted the gift with both hands, bowing slightly. They talked a little about the weather, about the price of vegetables, about nothing at all. When Mrs. Kim left, May lingered at the gate, watching the street. Children passed on bicycles, laughing. A delivery man whistled as he moved parcels to his truck. Life elsewhere moved icily, untouched by the delicate tensions that ruled this house. She thought, not for the first time, that perhaps kindness only survived where people had space to breathe. She pressed the gate shut and went back inside, the latch clicking like a whisper. Later that day, she decided to repair the plate Hannah had broken. She found the pieces in the bin, cleaned them, and laid them carefully on a towel. Some shards were missing, but most fit together like puzzle edges. She mixed adhesive slowly, her hands steady from decades of mending things others deemed ruined. When the glue set, faint golden seams formed along the cracks, ugly to some eyes, but to May, beautiful. They looked like scars that refused to hide. She remembered a Japanese word she'd once read in a magazine at the salon, kintsugi, the art of mending with gold, the idea that broken things could become more precious. The thought made her smile faintly. She placed the plate by the window to dry, where sunlight caught the gold lines and turned them into threads of light. Evening came early, the clouds heavy with unfallen rain. Hannah returned home late, shoes clicking sharply against the tiles. May greeted her softly. "You're home," but Hannah only nodded, exhausted. The scent of office perfume mixed with rain on her jacket. She looked toward the counter and noticed the repaired plate. Her expression tightened. "Why did you take that out of the trash?" she asked. May hesitated, then said, "It was too beautiful to throw away." Hannah's lips pressed into a thin line. "It was broken. You could cut yourself." The younger woman's tone carried more weariness than anger this time. May inclined her head. "I'll be careful." Hannah sighed, setting down her bag. "Please, just don't worry about these things." Her voice cracked slightly. The fight went away. She left the kitchen without another word. May looked after her and felt something shift and ache, but not resentment. Perhaps Hannah's anger was not hatred but exhaustion, the symptom of a world too fast for gentleness. Maybe May herself was a reminder of what Hannah feared becoming: slow, uncertain, fragile. She touched the edge of the repaired plate, feeling the ridges where gold met ceramic. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to sit at the table again. She placed a small cup of tea before her and watched the steam rise, curling into shapes that vanished before she could name them. The house was quiet, but the silence felt softer, no longer empty like the pause between heartbeats that keeps one alive. She thought of her husband again, of his last words whispered between breaths. "Take care of them, even when they don't see you doing it." At the time, she had believed it meant endless service. Now, sitting here, she wondered if it meant something, gentler pace. Yes, but also the courage to keep existing even when uninvited. She smiled faintly at the thought. Outside, the rain finally came, tapping softly on the window. The sound filled the kitchen with rhythm, washing the day clean. May lifted the cup to her lips. The tea was still warm. Upstairs, she heard footsteps, hesitant this time. Hannah's voice called quietly, almost uncertain, "Mother." The word startled her. It had been months since Hannah had used it. May turned, but before she could answer, Hannah appeared at the doorway, holding an umbrella. "It's leaking near the back porch," she said. May nodded, rising slowly. They worked together in the dim light, placing buckets under drips. At first they moved in silence, but soon Hannah spoke again, softer. "I shouldn't have yelled yesterday." May looked at her, seeing the tiredness around her eyes, the effort it took to say those words. "You were upset," May replied. "It happens." Hannah nodded, staring at the buckets as rain pattered into them. For a moment, they simply listened to the sound. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but something close and opening. Fragile as porcelain but real. When they returned inside, May noticed Hannah glance at the repaired plate again. "It's beautiful," Hannah said quietly, surprising them both. May smiled, her eyes wet but calm. "Broken things can still hold," she murmured. Hannah didn't answer, but her expression softened. She turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway. May stood there a while longer, watching the golden seams catch the dim light. She felt the ache in her chesties, the old loneliness loosening its grip. Tomorrow might bring another silence, another misunderstanding, but for tonight, there was gentleness in the air. She would take that, hold it carefully, like a mended plate that still deserved to be set on the table. The night passed with the soft persistence of rain. gentle but unending. By morning, the sky had washed itself pale, clouds lingering like forgotten thoughts. May woke to the faint smell of wet wood and soap. The house was still quiet, though she could hear Hannah moving somewhere upstairs, slow footsteps, deliberate, less sharp than usual. May sat up carefully, the ache in her knees reminding her of each year she had carried through this house. She tied her hair into a loose knot and looked at her hands for a long time. They were strong once. Now they trembled slightly, even when still. She pressed them together and whispered a short prayer for steadiness, not only of body but of heart. Then she rose and began her morning without thinking, guided by old rhythms that no longer needed memory to survive. In the kitchen, the repaired plate caught the dim light. It stood on the counter where she had left it, gleaming faintly, its gold seams alive under the dawn. May reached out and touched its surface with the reverence of someone greeting a friend. It felt cool and whole, though she knew the fractures were there beneath the polish. She poured tea into it not to drink, but as an offering, a quiet ritual of gratitude for endurance. As the steam rose, she found herself smiling faintly. She had endured too, even when the world mistook her silence for surrender. Perhaps that was its own kind of courage. One that didn't shout or demand, but simply continued. When Hannah came downstairs, she looked tired but calmer. Her hair was still damp, her cardigan soft at the shoulders. She paused when she saw May standing by the counter. "Good morning," she said. The words were small but real, the kind that carried weight after long silence. May nodded, answering gently, "Good morning." They stood there for a few moments, neither moving toward nor away from each other, until Hannah stepped forward to prepare breakfast. "Would you like some soup?" she asked without looking up. May blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Yes, please." It was a simple exchange, yet it felt like sunlight touching frost. Hannah worked quietly, her motions slower than usual, deliberate. May noticed the faint bruise on her wrist where the plate shards had grazed her skin days ago. She wanted to reach out, to heal, but she kept her distance, knowing that closeness too soon could reopen the wound between them. June entered soon after, still adjusting his tie. The air in the kitchen was different now, lighter, tentative, like a room rediscovering laughter after years of whispering. He noticed it too. His expression softened, and he reached for the kettle. "Smells good," he said to Hannah. Then to May, "Mom, are you feeling better today?" May smiled gently. "I am." He nodded, relieved, perhaps unaware of the quiet reconciliation forming between the two women who defined his world. When they sat to eat, May waited for Hannah to begin before she picked up her spoon. It was a small courtesy, but Hannah noticed. Her lips pressed together in an expression that was not quite a smile but no longer cold. They ate in calm silence, the clinking of spoons filling the space that once held arguments. After breakfast, Hannah left for work early, leaving June and May by the table. He lingered, glancing toward the repaired plate. "You fixed it," he said. "It's beautiful." May nodded, fingers brushing the golden seams. "Things can mend if we let them," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, then reached for his bag. "She's trying, Mom," he said quietly. "It's just stress. She's under pressure all the time." May's eyes met his, steady and kind. "I know," she answered. "She reminds me of myself when I was her age." He frowned slightly, as if unsure how that could be true, then smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured, and left. When the door closed, May sat for a while, letting the stillness settle around her. She could hear the rain easing, drops sliding off the roof in soft rhythms. The house no longer felt like a cage. It was simply quiet, and that quiet now carried room to breathe. She washed the dishes, her hands steady, the motions unhurried. When she finished, she placed the mended plate carefully in the cabinet, beside the unbroken ones. It fit there perfectly, though its golden scars glimmered faintly in the shadows. A reminder that even the wounded belonged among the whole. The day stretched ahead, soft and uneventful. May tended her garden, kneeling in the damp soil. She trimmed the wilted stems, replanted herbs, and hummed an old folk tune under her breath. The rhythm of work soothed her more than rest ever could. Each time her fingers brushed the earth, she felt something of her mother's hands in hers, a lineage of care that had shaped everything she knew. Around noon, the neighbors' children called to her from the fence, waving. She waved back, offering them small tangerines from her basket. Their laughter lingered long after they left, echoing through the open window. It felt like music. That evening, Hannah returned late again, this time with groceries. May met her at the door, taking one of the bags before Hannah could protest. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly. They cooked together for the first time in months. It was awkward at first, their movements colliding. But slowly they found rhythm. May chopped vegetables while Hannah stirred broth. Occasionally, their eyes met, and neither looked away too quickly. At one point, Hannah reached for the salt and brushed May's hand accidentally. She froze, murmuring an apology. May only smiled and kept chopping. The kitchen filled with warmth and steam, the scent of ginger and garlic wrapping around them like a fragile truce. When the soup was done, they ate together without waiting for June. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Hannah sipped her soup and glanced at May. "Your recipe is better," she admitted softly. May chuckled, the sound surprising both of them. "It's yours now," she said. "You made it taste new." Hannah smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing. For a long while, neither spoke. Yet the silence between them no longer hurt. It felt earned, peaceful. May realized then that forgiveness did not arrive like thunder, it came like dawn, slow and tender, illuminating what had always been waiting beneath the dark. When June finally returned, the house smelled of warmth and calm. He paused at the doorway, a smile tugging at his lips. "You two cooked together?" he asked. Hannah nodded, eyes soft. May just laughed quietly. He joined them, and for the first time in what felt like years, they ate as a family, no hierarchy, no hesitation. Only the quiet comfort of shared food. The repaired plate sat in the center of the table, holding a small bowl of fruit. Its golden cracks gleamed in the lamplight, a small symbol that broken things could still be beautiful, if only given time. That night, May sat by the window after everyone had gone to bed. The repaired plate still rested on the table, now empty, but the lamplight caught its seams like threads of moonlight woven through stone. Outside, the air smelled of wet soil and something faintly sweeter, perhaps the plum tree blooming earlier than usual. She watched the shadows of the leaves dance against the curtain and thought of how quiet peace was, how fragile. Forgiveness didn't erase the fracture. It merely changed how the pieces fit together. She had learned that in the same way she learned to mend fabric, by touch, by patience, by faith that small, careful motions could hold a world together. Somewhere upstairs, the floor creaked. Hannah, perhaps unable to sleep. May smiled faintly and whispered a wish into the darkness. The kind mothers once whispered for restless children. "May tomorrow be gentler than today." Morning came with thin sunlight spilling across the kitchen tiles. May was already awake, grinding beans for coffee, when Hannah entered, her hair loose, her expression thoughtful. "You're up early," Hannah said. May nodded, sliding the kettle closer to the stove. "Old habits," she replied. For a moment, they worked side by side, the quiet between them comfortable. Hannah reached for a mug, then paused, her gaze landing on the repaired plate displayed on the shelf. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about that plate." May looked up, waiting. "I used to hate seeing cracks," Hannah continued. "They made me nervous, like things were falling apart." Her voice softened. "But it looks strong now, like it's been through something and still stayed beautiful." May's eyes warmed. "We all have our seams," she said gently. "Some just shine more than others." Hannah smiled, small but real. Later that week, May visited the temple at the edge of town. She hadn't been there in months, too preoccupied with chores and silence. The path wound between bamboo trees, their stalks swaying with a sound like breath. She carried a small paper parcel, sticky rice, an orange, a folded note she'd written the night before. Inside the temple, incense curled into the air, sweet and smoky. She knelt on the mat, her knees protesting, and whispered her prayers. Gratitude for small mercies, forgiveness for her own bitterness, hope for harmony in the house she still called home. When she finished, she lit a candle and watched the flame tremble before steadying. It reminded her of Hannah's voice the night she apologized, wavering, then firm. May smiled. On her way back, she stopped by the market. The vendors greeted her warmly. They remembered her from years ago, before grief had turned her quiet. She bought fresh fish, daikon, and a bundle of chrysanthemums. The flowers glowed pale yellow in the afternoon light, bright against her gray cardigan. When she reached home, she placed them in a vase on the table. Hannah returned from work earlier than usual that evening, and her eyes widened at the sight. "They're beautiful," she said. "Your favorite?" May replied simply. "I thought the house needed color." Hannah touched one of the blossoms, her expression softening. "Thank you." There was no pretense in her tone, just sincerity, fragile but whole. As days turned into weeks, a rhythm settled over them. There were still moments of tension, small missteps, unspoken irritations, but they no longer cut deep. May learned to rest when tired instead of pushing through. Hannah learned to ask rather than command. June noticed the change, though he said little, perhaps afraid to disturb the balance. Meals became shared again. Laughter returned in quiet bursts. The table that once divided them began to gather them instead. May often found herself watching Hannah not out of suspicion, but curiosity. She saw how the younger woman's shoulders carried invisible burdens, long hours, social pressure, the unending race of modern life. Once, May would have judged. Now she only felt compassion. It was strange, she thought, how love could survive beneath so much silence, waiting for someone to notice. One evening, when the power flickered during a storm, they lit candles and sat together in the dim light. Hannah poured tea while June checked his phone for news. Rain drummed on the windows like steady applause. May took a sip of tea and said quietly, "When I was young, we used to sit like this all the time. My mother said storms were heaven's way of reminding us to stay close." Hannah looked at her, surprised by the softness in the words. "That's beautiful," she said. May smiled. "It is, isn't it?" They listened to the thunder roll, each flash of lightning painting the room white for a heartbeat. June began humming a tune from his childhood, and May joined softly. Hannah listened, eyes distant, then added her voice hesitant but true. The harmony was imperfect, but it felt like healing. When the lights finally returned, the room seemed brighter than before. The candles guttered, their wax pooling into golden shapes. May gathered them carefully, unwilling to waste a single drop. "Keep them," Hannah said, watching her. "They make the house feel warm." May nodded, pleased. Later that night, when everyone slept, she walked quietly through the house. Touching the walls, the banister, the door frames, she whispered small blessings, habitual phrases her husband once mocked as superstition. But she liked believing that care left traces, that love could soak into wood and stay there, invisible but enduring. In the kitchen, she paused before the repaired plate once more. The lamplight caught its gold veins, and for a moment, she imagined them pulsing faintly, alive with memory. She reached out and touched it lightly. "Thank you," she whispered, though she didn't know if she meant the plate, her husband, or time itself. The next morning brought unexpected warmth. Hannah came down carrying a small box. "For you," she said shyly. May blinked, surprised. Inside was a new porcelain plate, simple white, but along the rim, Hannah had painted thin golden lines, imperfect but lovely. "It's not as good as yours," she said quickly, embarrassed. May held it carefully, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful," she said, "and now we have two." They placed it beside the repaired one, the old and the new glinting side by side. The light through the window hit them both, and for a fleeting moment, the room seemed full of warmth, like sunlight caught in porcelain. Later, June suggested they invite neighbors for a meal, something they hadn't done in years. Hannah agreed, almost eagerly, and May felt her heart swell. That night, laughter filled the house again. The table groaned under the weight of dishes, the air thick with aroma and chatter. Mrs. Kim complimented the flowers, and Hannah proudly said May had chosen them. Someone joked that the repaired plate looked like art, and May blushed while Hannah defended it with a smile. "It's our treasure," she said, "proof that things can break and still belong." May looked at her, then really looked, and saw not the sharp young woman who once shouted but someone softer, still learning, still brave enough to change. As the guests left and the house quieted, May stood by the door, watching the lanterns flicker outside. The night breeze carried laughter from down the street. Behind her, Hannah and June washed dishes, their voices low but kind. May turned toward the table once more. The two plates gleamed side by side, golden seams catching the last of the candlelight. She reached out, tracing the lines, feeling both gratitude and grief intertwined. Loss had shaped her life, but so had endurance. And now she saw they were not opposites but partners, two sides of the same heart. She smiled softly and whispered to the room, to her husband's memory, to herself, "We're all mended, in our way." Spring arrived quietly that year, wrapped in sunlight and birdsong. The plum blossoms that May had tended so carefully began to open one by one, scattering pale petals across the garden like soft confetti. The house felt different now, lighter, more lived in, laughter returning in shy bursts. Hannah often came home earlier, sometimes sitting beside May while peeling fruit or chatting about her office work. June seemed relieved, his shoulders looser, his smiles easier. The family rhythm had found a new shape, still imperfect, still delicate, but steady enough to breathe in. Yet beneath that calm, May sometimes felt a strange stillness within herself, as though she had become too quiet even for her own thoughts. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like an echo after long music, beautiful, but hollow if you listened too long. One morning, she noticed her reflection in the window as she wiped the glass. Her hair had gone whiter since winter, Her back curved more sharply. She studied her face and thought, I am disappearing slowly, one kindness at a time. The idea didn't frighten her. It simply felt true. She found comfort in small duties, the folding of napkins, the way light filtered through lace curtains. But when Hannah laughed loudly on the phone with friends, May sometimes felt a pang she couldn't name. Not jealousy, not grief, something gentler. Like standing in a doorway watching others move toward futures she would never see. Still, she smiled, reminding herself that love often meant stepping aside quietly. That afternoon, Hannah came home with a potted orchid. It's for you, she said, placing it on the counter. You like flowers that last. May smiled, touched by the thought. They remind me to wait, she said softly. Hannah nodded, though her phone buzzed almost immediately, pulling her away. May watched her leave the room, the orchid trembling slightly in her wake. She touched one petal. It felt like silk, thin and brave. That evening, while washing the dishes, she caught sight of the repaired plate beside the new one. They looked like sisters, she thought. One scarred, one whole, both shining in the same light. She wondered which one she resembled now. The days began to blend. May's health grew uneven. Some mornings her joints stiffened until she had to sit down halfway through sweeping. Hannah noticed. You should rest more, she said one evening. Let me handle the chores. May smiled, waving her off. If I stop moving, I'll vanish. Hannah frowned, but said nothing. Later, May heard her whisper to June in the hall. Her voice edged with worry. She's slowing down, she said. May smiled faintly at the honesty. It was strange, being spoken of like weather, inevitable, unpredictable, something to prepare for. She didn't resent it. She only hoped they'd remember her warmth, not her absence. One Sunday, as the family shared breakfast, Hannah mentioned a promotion that might require longer hours and occasional travel. It's a good opportunity, she said, her voice both proud and uncertain. June congratulated her instantly, his eyes bright. May smiled, though she felt a quiet ache. Change was good, she reminded herself. Growth meant survival. But that night, when the house fell silent, she found herself sitting by the window, staring at the dark garden. The orchid's petals had started to fall, one after another, pale against the wood. She gathered them gently, pressing each between pages of an old notebook. She wrote beside them, every ending leaves its color. Weeks passed. Hannah's work grew heavier. The laughter that once filled the house returned less often. May spent more time alone. She began walking to the temple again, slower now, but steady. The priest greeted her with gentle familiarity. You've come often lately, he said. She smiled. I'm learning patience, she replied. She lit a candle for her husband, another for the living, and a third for herself. The flame wavered at first, then steadied just like her breathing. That small ritual became her anchor. Light, silence, gratitude. Each time she returned home, she found the repaired plate waiting, its golden lines glowing faintly in afternoon sun. It reminded her that even fragile things could bear witness. One evening, Hannah returned later than usual, her eyes tired, her smile brittle. I'm sorry I'm late, she said softly. Work was endless. May nodded. You're doing well, she said, meaning it. Hannah hesitated, then confessed. Sometimes, I wonder if it's worth it, all this rushing. May placed a hand on her arm. You'll know when it's time to stop running, she said. The younger woman looked down, her expression unreadable. For the first time, May saw not just her daughter-in-law but a woman fighting quietly with herself the same way May once had. She wished she could tell her that peace was not found in success but in stillness. But she knew such lessons had to be lived, not taught. The next morning, May felt dizzy as she rose. The room tilted, colors swimming. She reached for the wall and steadied herself, breathing slow until the world returned to its place. She didn't mention it to anyone. Instead, she prepared breakfast as usual, humming faintly. When Hannah came downstairs, she paused. You're pale, she said. I'm fine, May answered. Hannah frowned but didn't press. Later that day, May sat by the garden, sunlight flickering through the leaves. She listened to the faint hum of distant traffic and the whisper of the wind. The world felt distant but kind, like an old friend who didn't need conversation to understand. She closed her eyes and smiled, letting the warmth rest on her skin. That evening, the family ate together again. Hannah talked about work. June shared a story from the office. May listened, laughing softly at their jokes. For a moment, everything felt as it should. Simple, ordinary, alive. But when the laughter faded, May noticed her hands trembling again. She placed them in her lap, hiding the movement beneath the table. Hannah saw but said nothing. The repaired plate sat in its usual place on the shelf, catching lamplight. May's gaze lingered there. She thought of all the meals it had survived, all the hands that had held it. In that reflection, she saw her own life cracked, mended, luminous, in places where it had once broken. She smiled quietly. That night, as rain began to fall once more, May dreamt of her husband. He stood in the doorway, holding a candle. His face was clear, his voice low. "It's all right to rest now," he said. "You've done enough." She wanted to tell him she still had things to finish, plants to water, stories to hear, but his smile silenced her. When she woke, tears lined her cheeks, though her heart felt light. The sound of the rain outside was soft, familiar. She whispered to the dark, "Soon." Morning light crept through the curtains, gentle as breath. May woke slowly, her limbs heavy but her thoughts calm. For a moment, she could not tell if the dream of her husband had been real. The house was still, wrapped in the kind of silence that comes after prayer. She dressed carefully, the simple gray cardigan she favored, and went to the kitchen. The orchid on the counter had shed its last petal, leaving only green stems. She smiled at it, not in sadness but in thanks. It had done what it could, bloomed beautifully, faded quietly, given what it had to give. She boiled water for tea and sat near the window, letting the early sun warm her hands. The repaired plate glimmered faintly from its shelf. May thought of the day she had fixed it, how fragile it had felt. How miraculous to hold something once broken and make it whole again. She wondered if people could do the same when their time was near. Hannah came down a few minutes later, already dressed for work. "You're up early again," she said softly. May smiled. "The morning waits for no one." Hannah poured herself coffee and hesitated before sitting opposite her. "Are you feeling all right? You look tired." May laughed gently. "I'm fine, just a little slower." Hannah's brows knit together, worry flickering across her face. "Please, don't overdo it. Let me handle more around the house." May nodded, though she knew she wouldn't. She didn't want to stop moving. Every small motion was a thread keeping her tied to the world. They ate quietly, the ticking clock filling the space between them. When Hannah stood to leave, she touched May's shoulder, lightly, a brief, awkward gesture of affection, but it lingered long after she was gone. That day, May decided to visit the temple again. The air smelled of rain, the earth dark and rich. She took her time walking, her steps steady but slow. Along the way, she passed children chasing a ball, a shopkeeper sweeping dust from the front of his store, an old man feeding pigeons. Life unfolded gently around her, each small act a proof of persistence. At the temple, she lit her candles, one for the past, one for the present, one for the uncertain days ahead. She prayed not for herself this time but for the peace of the house, for Hannah's balance, for June's kindness to stay unbroken. When she finished, she sat on the low stone bench outside, watching the wind stir the prayer flags. They fluttered like hearts learning to breathe again. By afternoon, she returned home and found the house empty. A note on the counter in Hannah's handwriting read, "Went to run errands. Back soon. There's soup in the pot." May smiled, touched by the care hidden in such a simple sentence. She ladled the soup into her bowl, savoring its warmth. The repaired plate gleamed nearby, its golden seams bright against the wood. As she ate, she realized how silent the world had become, not hollow, but peaceful. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the occasional creak of settling walls, all of it felt like a conversation she understood without words. She finished her meal, washed the bowl, and dried it carefully. Then, for reasons she couldn't quite name, she took the repaired plate from its shelf and set it gently on the table before her. She sat for a long time, tracing its golden lines with her fingertips. The seams felt warm, alive, as if carrying memory through them. May thought of all the years she had lived in this house, the births, the laughter, the fights, the silences. Every memory had left its mark, and yet the house still stood, full of light. She realized, then, that the measure of a life was not in what remained unbroken, but in what endured after breaking. The thought filled her chest with something soft and heavy, like the ache that comes before tears, but sweeter. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment's rest. The moment stretched. The rain began again, light as breath on glass. Outside, the plum tree trembled under the weight of its blossoms. Inside, the repaired plate gleamed quietly in the dim light. When Hannah returned an hour later, calling May's name, the house felt oddly still. She found her sitting at the table, her hands folded neatly, her face calm. The tea beside her had gone cold, the steam long faded. For a long time, Hannah stood there, unable to move. She noticed the repaired plate, the faint smile on May's lips, the peace that filled the room like a final prayer. June arrived minutes later, his voice breaking the quiet. He called his mother's name again and again, but she did not answer. Hannah reached for him, her own voice shaking. They stood together, the two of them, in the house that May had kept alive with her patience. Around them, the afternoon light turned golden, catching the plate's veins until it shone like a small sun. Hannah touched it gently, her tears falling silently. She fixed everything she could, she whispered. June nodded, his face wet, his hand trembling over his heart. In the silence that followed, the rain outside softened to mist, and the world seemed to pause, listening. Days later, after the funeral, the house remained full of flowers, friends, people May had helped quietly over the years. Hannah found small notes tucked in books, in drawers, each one written in May's steady handwriting. Small instructions, blessings, reminders. Don't forget to prune the garden after rain. Light candles when the house feels heavy. Kindness lasts longer than apologies. Hannah read them all, her tears steady but calm. She placed the repaired plate on the table where May used to sit, beside the one she had painted herself. The two plates gleamed side by side, one gold with history, the other new with promise. The sunlight that filtered through the window made them both glow as though they breathed. That evening, as dusk fell, Hannah brewed tea and poured 2 cups, one for herself, one for the empty chair. June joined her, quiet but not broken. They sat together, sipping slowly. The silence no longer felt heavy. It was simply full of memory, of presence, of gratitude. Hannah looked at the plate and said softly, "She never asked for much, did she?" June shook his head. "She just wanted us to sit together." Hannah smiled through her tears. "Then we will." They stayed there until the moon rose, its reflection glimmering faintly in the gold lines of the repaired plate, like a promise kept. The weeks after May's funeral unfolded like slow rain, steady, cleansing, but heavy with silence. Hannah moved through the house as if through memory itself, each corner carrying traces of the woman who had once tended it. She found May's handwriting everywhere, labels on jars, old recipes, quiet reminders in the margins of cookbooks. Sometimes, when the afternoon light slanted across the table, Hannah caught herself expecting to see her sitting there, fingers folded, eyes gentle. Instead, there were only the 2 plates on the shelf, the repaired one and the painted one, glowing faintly as the day changed color. May's absence was strange, not emptiness, but presence too wide for walls to contain. At first, Hannah tried to keep busy. She returned to work, drowning her hours in reports, deadlines, and conversations that meant little. June urged her to rest, but she couldn't. The house felt too still when she stopped moving. Nights were the hardest, quiet, stretching long, her thoughts circling memories she hadn't known mattered. She missed May's hum when she cooked, her soft footsteps, even the way she quietly rearranged the flowers when Hannah wasn't looking. Once, coming home late, Hannah saw a thin layer of dust on the repaired plate. Without thinking, she wiped it clean and whispered, "Sorry," as if May might hear. The silence that followed felt like forgiveness. Then came the news. Hannah's mother, who lived in another province, had fallen ill. It wasn't serious, the doctors said, but it required attention. Hannah hesitated. She hadn't visited in months, their relationship strained by years of quiet disapproval and distance. Her mother had never fully accepted her marriage or the way she lived. June encouraged her to go. "You'll regret it if you don't," he said gently. Hannah nodded, torn between duty and fear. The thought of stepping into another house full of unsaid words made her chest tighten. That night, as she packed a small bag, she found one of May's notes tucked inside her sewing box. The hardest kind is the one that expects nothing back. She held it for a long time before slipping it into her pocket. The train ride the next morning was long and gray, the landscape sliding past like slow thoughts. Hannah sat by the window, watching fields blur into towns, her reflection superimposed on the passing world. She thought of May's quiet strength, her way of enduring anger with grace that never turned bitter. Could she do the same? She wasn't sure. The memory of her own outburst years ago, the broken plate, the cruel words still lived in her like a scar. She had promised herself never to speak that way again, not to anyone. But facing her mother, she feared the same impatience might rise. She touched the pocket where May's note rested, the paper warm from her hand. "Expect nothing back," she whispered, practicing the words like prayer. When she arrived, her mother was sitting on the porch, thinner than Hannah remembered, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. For a moment, neither spoke. The years between them hung in the air like a curtain. Then her mother said, "You came." The tone was not welcoming, but not unkind either. Hannah nodded. "Of course I came." Inside, the house felt smaller, the air thick with medicine and thyme. She helped with small things, cooking, cleaning, folding laundry. Her mother watched quietly, occasionally correcting her motions. "You always cut too thick," she murmured once, gesturing toward the vegetables. Hannah smiled faintly. "So did you, when I was young." The old woman blinked, startled, then laughed softly, the sound brittle but real. It was the first time they had laughed together in years. Days passed like that, slow and tentative. Hannah's mother spoke more as her strength returned. She asked about June, about work, even about May. "Was she kind to you?" she asked one evening, voice cautious. Hannah hesitated, then said, "More than I deserved." Her mother studied her face, perhaps hearing the weight in those words. "Kindness is a strange inheritance," she said quietly. "It skips generations, sometimes." Hannah thought about that long after, sitting on the porch under the moonlight. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe May's gentleness had come to her late, but it had come. She could feel it now, not as guilt but as guidance. Like a steady hand over hers when she faltered. On the last day of her visit, Hannah prepared breakfast before dawn. The rice steamed gently. The tea glowed amber in the pot. Her mother came to the table, walking slowly but smiling. "You learned her way," she said, tasting the soup. "The old woman's way." Hannah smiled, startled by the affection in her tone. "She taught me more than recipes," she said softly. They ate in silence, the air warm between them. When Hannah rose to leave, her mother reached for her hand. "Tell her thank you," she said, "for teaching you what I couldn't." Hannah nodded, tears burning her eyes. "I will." She didn't add that May already knew. The journey home was quiet. Outside, the clouds had cleared, leaving the fields gold under the sun. Hannah rested her head against the window, exhaustion mixing with peace. She thought of how May used to sit by the window, hands folded, watching the rain. There was something eternal about that posture, acceptance without surrender. For the first time, Hannah understood that kind of strength. It wasn't loud or perfect. It simply endured. She smiled faintly as the train hummed on, carrying her back to the house that still held May's breath in its walls. When she arrived, June was waiting at the station. "How is she?" he asked, taking her bag. "Better," Hannah said. "And?" "Softer, maybe, or maybe it's me." He smiled, understanding more than words could explain. That evening, back home, Hannah placed a small bowl of rice before May's photo and whispered, "I kept your promise." The repaired plate gleamed beside it, golden veins catching the lamplight. The house felt full again, not because May was there, but because her grace had rooted itself in every heart that remained. The following morning it dawned bright and cold. The house was still heavy with the scent of incense from the offering Hannah had made the night before. She moved quietly through the rooms, straightening the cushions, dusting the shelves, touching the places May used to linger. The air felt different now, lighter, yet alive, as though something unseen still breathed beside her. On the kitchen counter, the repaired plate gleamed beside its painted twin. She paused to run her thumb along the gold seam, whispering, "I did as you taught me." The warmth that rose in her chest wasn't sorrow anymore, it was gratitude, quiet and full. June joined her soon after, hair tousled, the smell of coffee following him. "You were up early again," he said, smiling faintly. Hannah nodded. "I was thinking about her." He leaned against the counter, eyes soft. "You always are." They shared a look, one built on the unspoken understanding that grief never leaves. It only changes shape. After breakfast, June left for work, and Hannah stayed behind, tending the garden May had loved. The soil was dark, pliant beneath her hands, and the first shoots of spring herbs had begun to peek through. She knelt there, pulling weeds, her fingers tracing the earth like a familiar face. "You'd be proud," she murmured. "Everything's growing again." It was then she noticed the small bird, a sparrow, wing bent awkwardly, struggling near the fence. Instinctively, she reached out, cupping it gently. Its tiny body trembled against her palms, heart fluttering wild with fear. "Easy," she whispered, wrapping it in her sleeve. May would have known exactly what to do. Hannah brought the bird inside, placing it in a shallow basket lined with cloth. She fed it a few drops of water and watched it breathe, its chest rising and falling. For the next few days, caring for the bird became her quiet ritual. Each morning she'd check its wing, whispering encouragement that sounded more like prayers. She remembered how May used to talk to her plants, to stray cats, even to the wind-soft words that held the world together. Now Hannah understood why. Compassion wasn't weakness, it was maintenance for the soul. One afternoon, as she changed the cloth in the basket, the bird stretched its wing fully for the first time. The movement startled her, a tremor of triumph in so small a creature. She smiled, tears blurring her vision. "You're ready," she said. Carrying the basket to the open window, she held her breath as the sparrow hopped to the sill. For a moment it hesitated, then leaped into the air, wings catching sunlight. Hannah watched it go until it became a speck in the blue. A strange lightness filled her chest, the kind that came from letting go and still loving what flew away. That evening, she told June about it. He listened, hand resting on hers. "You sound like her," he said softly. Hannah laughed quietly. "Maybe I'm finally learning." He looked toward the repaired plate on the shelf, golden seams glinting in the lamplight. "You know," he said, "she would have liked how you handled your mother." Hannah smiled, remembering the quiet breakfast, the unspoken peace. "I think she would have said it was time," she replied. "Time to stop carrying what doesn't need to be carried." The words lingered between them, gentle as the steam from their tea. Spring deepened into early summer. Hannah returned to work, but something within her had shifted. She spoke more softly, and listened more fully. Colleagues noticed. Even her boss remarked that she seemed centered. She smiled but didn't explain. In quiet moments, she thought of May not as a ghost or a shadow, but as a rhythm inside her actions. When she mediated an argument at work, she thought of the patience that once steadied an entire household. When she stayed late helping a junior employee, she remembered the way May had once stayed silent rather than lash out. The lessons weren't spoken, they were lived. One weekend, Hannah decided to visit the temple again. She carried fresh flowers, white lilies, and small chrysanthemums and walked the path May had once walked. The priest recognized her and bowed deeply. "It's good to see you," he said. She nodded, placing the flowers at the altar. As the incense smoke rose, curling into the air like fading breath, Hannah whispered, "Thank you." She didn't specify what, perhaps for forgiveness, perhaps for endurance. Outside, the sky was wide and blue, the kind that seemed to hold memory without weight. She took a deep breath and smiled. When she returned home, the house felt calm. The repaired plate still sat in its place, gleaming faintly, but it no longer looked like a reminder of loss. It looked like part of the family, ordinary, beloved, whole in its own way. Hannah placed a bowl of fruit on it and called June for dinner. As they ate, the sun dipped low, washing the kitchen in gold. The air smelled of rice and oranges and something invisible but familiar, the lingering kindness May had left behind. Hannah glanced at the plate, then at June, and felt something close to peace settle in her heart. That night, long after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, Hannah stood at the window, looking at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a sparrow chirped, a sound so soft she almost thought she imagined it. She smiled and whispered into the dark, "I'm still mending, but I'm learning to shine." The wind stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of the garden into the room. Behind her, the golden lines of the repaired plate caught the starlight and glowed faintly, as if answering her. Years passed in the way years often do, quietly, almost politely, without asking permission. The house remained, weathering storms and summers, holding laughter and silence with equal patience. Hannah's hair began to silver at the edges, though her movements stayed quick and purposeful. June's once youthful face carried soft lines now, traces of work and contentment. The world outside changed, cars faster, seasons shorter, but inside, the rhythms May had built still guided their days. The repaired plate, golden seams dulled to honey over time, stayed on the shelf above the table. Every so often, Hannah would dust it, whispering a small greeting as though to an old friend. The garden flourished beyond what May could have imagined. Hannah had planted more flowers over the years, camellias, morning glories, herbs whose names she learned from May's old notebook. Each spring, the plum tree bloomed first, scattering white petals like blessings across the soil. Neighbors often stopped by to admire it. "Your mother-in-law must have had a gift," they said. Hannah always smiled. "She still does." The phrase puzzled them, but she never explained. Some truths weren't for telling, only living. In the evenings, she would sit by the garden window with a cup of tea, the scent of soil and rain filling her lungs, and feel May's presence in the quiet hum of growing things. Her own mother passed away one autumn morning, peacefully, with Hannah by her side. At the funeral, Hannah stood beneath a canopy of yellow leaves, the wind brushing her hair like a hand. She felt no bitterness, only the gentle ache of completion. Afterward, when she returned home, she placed a small photo of her mother beside May's. Two women who had shaped her life in opposite ways now shared the same shelf. "You'd both have liked each other in your better moods," she whispered with a smile. June chuckled softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "They're probably arguing about cooking already." The thought made them both laugh, the sound warm against the autumn wind. Time brought new changes. June's company transferred him to a nearby city, and for the first time, Hannah considered selling the house. The idea hurt, yet she knew it was inevitable. The world didn't pause for memory. Still, before making any decisions, she walked through every room, touching each wall, each familiar corner. The kitchen smelled faintly of ginger and dust. The floor creaked where May's chair used to sit. The repaired plate, of course, would come with them. Hannah couldn't imagine leaving it behind. She wrapped it carefully in cloth, tracing the golden lines one last time before placing it in a box marked fragile. As she sealed it, she whispered, "We'll take you with us." The move was not easy, but it carried no grief. Their new apartment overlooked a small park, with sunlight that fell in kind ways. Hannah unpacked slowly, arranging familiar objects until the air began to feel like theirs again. When she opened the box containing the repaired plate, she paused. The light from the window struck it perfectly, setting its golden seams glowing as if newly mended. She placed it on the kitchen counter, beside the window, where the morning sun could touch it. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her, not sorrow, but continuity. The house might change, the years might pass, but the heart of care remained, bright and alive. Soon after settling in, Hannah began teaching cooking classes at a community center nearby. At first it was just a way to meet people, but it grew into something more. She taught the recipes May had once made, adapting them gently, explaining not only the how but the why, the patience behind the simmering, the small kindness of tasting before serving. Her students, mostly younger women and men finding their footing in the world, adored her calm and humor. "You're so patient," one said once, after burning a pan of rice. Hannah smiled, recalling May's voice in her mind. "Patience is not waiting, it's staying kind while you wait." She repeated it aloud, and the class fell silent, as though hearing wisdom that rang older than the words themselves. In time, people began calling her Teacher Hannah, though she laughed at the title. On weekends, she invited her students for shared meals at home, using the repaired plate as centerpiece. It became a quiet tradition. Each gathering ended with someone asking about it. Hannah would tell the story simply that it had once been broken, that someone she loved had mended it with care. "It reminds me that nothing truly ends if you treat it gently enough," she'd say, and the room would grow soft with thought. She never mentioned names. Some stories, she felt, belonged to the silence between words. One spring, a young woman in her class reminded her of herself at that age, ambitious, sharp-tongued, kind but easily flustered. During a late lesson, after everyone else had left, the girl broke a bowl by accident. "I'm so sorry," she said, mortified. Hannah looked at the shards and smiled gently. "Then we'll fix it." The next day, she brought gold paint and glue, showing her the slow art of repair. As they worked, Hannah told her about the philosophy behind it, not as a moral, but as truth born of experience. "What's broken isn't useless," she said. "It just needs time to remember what it was meant to hold." The girl nodded, tears bright in her eyes. When they finished, the bowl shone in the afternoon sun, the seams glinting like soft fire. Hannah touched it lightly and thought of May, of the way she had once held a broken plate and turned shame into something luminous. That night, after the class had gone, Hannah sat alone at the table. The city hummed beyond the window, lights flickering like fireflies. She looked around the room at the new shelves, the photographs, the plants thriving near the glass, and felt an ache of fullness. She reached for the repaired plate, holding it close. Its surface was cool and smooth, but she could feel its heartbeat beneath her fingers, the pulse of stories, of love carried forward. "You made me better," she whispered, "and I'm still learning." Outside, the first rain of spring began to fall, gentle and constant, the same rhythm that had once filled the old house. Hannah closed her eyes and listened. The sound was not sad anymore. It was simply alive. She set the plate back on the table, where the lamplight caught its golden veins, turning them into threads of dawn. The rain lasted through the night, soft and unhurried. By morning, the air smelled clean, the kind of freshness that seems to erase years. Hannah woke early, the city still half asleep, and brewed tea. She set a small cup before the repaired plate. As she always did, a gesture more habit than ritual, though it still felt sacred. Sunlight broke through the clouds, falling directly across the table. For a heartbeat, the golden seams shimmered as if alive. Hannah smiled, whispering, "Good morning," the way she once greeted May. The house, though quiet, seemed to hum in response. Later that week, the community center organized a small exhibition on traditional crafts. One of the coordinators, having heard of Hannah's lesson in mending, invited her to display the repaired plate. At first, she hesitated. The plate felt too personal, too full of memory. But that evening, as she looked at it glowing gently on the table, she thought of May's voice. Kindness is only complete when it's shared. She agreed. On the day of the exhibit, she carried it carefully in a linen cloth, heart pounding like she was carrying something living. When she arrived, the other artists greeted her warmly, curious about the piece. She placed it at the center of a wooden table, simple, unadorned. Under the hall's soft lights, the plate seemed to shine from within. Throughout the day, people stopped to look. Some admired the craftsmanship, others simply stared in silence. One elderly man asked her, "Was this done with real gold?" Hannah smiled. "Yes," she said, "but the gold isn't the most valuable part." He tilted his head. "Then what is?" She looked at the plate, its glow steady and calm. "The hands that held it when it broke," she said softly. The man nodded, eyes misting, and walked away without another word. For the rest of the afternoon, strangers kept pausing by her table, lingering a little longer than politeness required. Hannah didn't speak much. She simply stood nearby, her palms resting lightly on the table's edge, as though standing guard over a shared memory. When the exhibit ended, the coordinator approached her. People were moved. She said, "Would you consider giving a small talk next time? About the meaning behind your work?" Hannah laughed lightly. "It's not my work," she said. "I only learned how to see it." The woman smiled. "Then maybe you can teach us to see too." Hannah promised she would think about it. As she wrapped the plate again in cloth, she whispered, "You've gone further than either of us imagined." And she meant it. That night, back home, Hannah placed the plate on its usual shelf. The apartment was dim, except for the warm glow of the lamp beside it. She poured herself tea and sat quietly, watching the steam drift toward the ceiling. The city murmured beyond the window, distant sirens, laughter, the rhythm of rain beginning again. She closed her eyes and listened, hearing not sorrow this time but continuity, a quiet thread running through every sound. When she opened her eyes, the plate caught her reflection. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw another face beside hers, older, gentler, familiar. She smiled, unafraid. "You can rest now," she whispered. "I'll keep it safe." The years that followed unfolded in small, golden patterns. Hannah's classes grew larger. Her students carried fragments of her lessons into their own lives. Some sent her photos of mended bowls, others letters about reconciled families. Every story felt like another seam added to an ever-widening circle of repair. June retired early, spending his days tending a small rooftop garden. They lived quietly, content in the way people become when they have made peace with the repaired plate remained with them always, sometimes on display, sometimes tucked safely away but never forgotten. It had become more than a relic. It was a witness, a teacher, a small, steady miracle of endurance. One summer afternoon, Hannah sat by the window while June napped beside her. A young sparrow landed on the sill, feathers puffed against the heat. She smiled and set out a few crumbs. The bird tilted its head, cautious but curious, then began to eat. Hannah watched it, remembering the broken-winged sparrow from years ago, the first creature she'd truly cared for after May's passing. The memory came gently, without ache. She whispered, "Hello again," and the bird hopped closer, unafraid. Beyond the window, the city shimmered in the sunlight, and for a moment everything seemed connected: the sparrow, the plate, the generations of hands that had given, broken, and mended in turn. As the day softened into evening, Hannah took out her journal and began to write, not about loss, but about inheritance, the invisible kind that lived in gestures and patience. "Every act of care is a kind of repair," she wrote, "and everything we mend teaches the world how to stay whole." She paused, looking at the words, then smiled. They sounded like something May might have said. She closed the notebook gently, setting it beside the repaired plate. The two objects glowed side by side, the lamplight tracing their edges. Night came slowly, wrapping the room in quiet. Hannah sat there a while longer, her breathing even, her eyes soft. The repaired plate gleamed one last time before the light dimmed. Somewhere outside, a sparrow sang, its voice carrying through the open window, bright and clear. Hannah whispered, "Thank you," and the note lingered in the air, fading into peace. The wind stirred the curtains, the tea cooled, and the house settled into stillness, not empty, not lonely, just complete.